Using your smart speaker for this, okay, I've added cheese to your shopping list. Yeah, that's pretty smart. But shopping online with SuperValue? That's even smarter. Have the best produce hand-picked and delivered straight to your door. Download the SuperValue app now or shop online at supervalue.ie.
Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome to week 2 of the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Week 1 is in the books. It was a good week. I went 6-2 in my normal fantasy leagues. I'm not going to count my QB-only league. It's very weird scoring, blah, 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 whatever. 6-2, went 6-3 with the podcast picks, which we'll get to in the latter half of this show. And I hit on quite a few of my my player calls for the game breakdowns. Jameson Crowder had a big game. Devontae Adams had a big game. Josh Jacobs. So let's get into it, man. Week 2, we got the Falcons at the Cowboys. I have one of the Cowboys in my 3-player TD score parlay. But honestly, you're going to play all your Cowboys. You're going to play Julio, Ridley. Hayden Hurst was somewhat of a disappointment in week 1. He was dealing with Jamal Adams pretty much the whole game. So the sleepers of this matchup for me would be Russell Gage. I hate the term sleepers, by the way, but I guess if there's one guy under the radar that I think should have a pretty good week, it's Russell Gage. I saw 12 targets last week. Same as Julio, same as Calvin Ridley. All 3 of them 12 targets. All 3 of them caught 9 passes. Russell Gage had 114 yards receiving. The Cowboys came into this year with a pretty thin secondary, so maybe Gage has another big game here. The Cowboys, it would be their new starting tight end, Dalton Schultz, who will get his chance with Blake Jarwin on IR now after a knee injury. Sucks for that guy. He had a lot of people thinking he was going to have a big year. Next, we got the Bills and the Dolphins. I would not play either of the Dolphins running backs. With Devontae Parker questionable, Mike Gesicki is in play, but I don't see the Dolphins putting up too many points in this game. Cam Newton had 75 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns versus the Dolphins last week. Last week. Josh Allen had 14 carries for 57 yards and a rushing touchdown in week 1 against the Jets. So I think he gets into the end zone again here against the Dolphins. I know John Brown had a nice game in week 1. There's probably a lot of people out there looking at John Brown's stat line from last week on your bench most likely, and you're saying, I'm considering playing him. But I think the Dolphins secondary is actually one that by mid-season really we'll be looking at as a pretty tough matchup with Byron Jones and Xavier Howard and the rookie Noah Igbiani. I'm going to try that one. John Brown is a tough guy to speculate on because he really is a pretty damn consistent player, but I'm keeping him on the bench this week. I also saw he's pretty sure he's questionable as of right now, so that decision might be made for you. Next, we go to the NFC South, the Panthers at the Buccaneers. This is another game that I have one of the running backs in my TD parlay score, so I won't go too in-depth, but the Panthers' defense was getting thrown around against the Raiders last week. They gave up big runs to Josh Jacobs and Devontae Parker. They gave up big catches to Henry Ruggs and Nelson Aguilar. I think the Buccaneers do the same. Last week, Mike Evans was basically on one leg, but Chris Godwin and Scotty Miller still had nice games. Gronk didn't do much at all, really, but O.J. Howard Had a pretty nice stat line, 4 catches on 6 targets for 36 yards and a touchdown. Pretty good for a tight end. But I would play all of your Buccaneers against this Panthers defense, and I have a feeling we might be saying that a lot this year. Play everyone against the Panthers. Chris Godwin showed up on the injury report on Wednesday. He apparently started showing concussion symptoms on Wednesday, which is never good to start showing symptoms in the middle of the week. So if Scotty Miller is available out there in your leagues, I'm sure the waiver has already run for you. But if he's available, I would 100% run out and grab him. Not exactly sure if he would take on the deeper role of Mike Evans, or if he would kind of play in the slot like Chris Godwin does. But if Godwin's out or if Evans is out, I think Scotty Miller is a great play. Next, we got the Broncos and the Steelers. Both of these teams are already dealing with injuries at running back. James Conner is dealing with an ankle injury, and Philip Lindsay apparently has turf toe. Because of that, you're going to see people jumping on Benny Snell after his 100-yard game last week, and maybe Royce Freeman, but I would not play any running backs against this Steelers defense. We just saw how Saquon Barkley was held to under 10 yards on 15 carries. No thank you. So if you drafted Melvin Gordon as your RB2, I guess you can consider him a flex option this week. If you have another running back to throw into your RB2 spot, I would. But don't expect much. The Broncos defense didn't do too bad either, considering no preseason and very little training camp. And their first game, they got to play Derrick Henry, that monster of a man. Hell of a first game to play. It took the Steelers a while to get going, and yes, Juju scored twice. He's the stud that you play every game, every week, no matter what. But Deontay Johnson had a nice game as well. We saw Washington score a touchdown, but I think I want to see one more game from Deontay Johnson before I consider him a legit starting option. The Broncos are pretty thin on the defense. They got a couple injuries, but yeah, I'm expecting this to be a pretty defensive-heavy game. Next, we got the Lions and the Packers. I hit on my Packers call last week, said Rodgers was going to light up the Vikings and Devontae Adams would see a boatload of targets, and he did. 17 targets, caught 14 of them for 156 yards with 2 touchdowns. I think we're going to see a lot of those kind of games from Devontae Adams this year. Rodgers had 364 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. If I have Rodgers on my team, I'm playing him again. Another NFC North, division rival. The Lions just gave up 3 touchdown passes to Mitch Trubisky. They gave up 5 yards a carry to David Montgomery. So Aaron Jones is another great play. The Packers' run defense was their biggest weakness last year. They gave up 100 yards rushing on 18 carries between Cook and Mattison last week. And they let Dalvin Cook score twice. So the Lions just gave Adrian Peterson 14 carries last week, and he averaged 6.5 yards per carry. So I think he's in line to get another 12 to 15 carries again. And against this Packers run defense, that might be enough to get away with it, in your flex, at least in non-PPR leagues. But it's crazy. Here we are in 2020. And we got Frank Gore and Adrian Peterson are going to probably be the lead backs on their teams in week 2. Funny how these old guys, some of them, they stick around forever, it seems like. Next, we got Jaguars at Titans. The Titans did a pretty good job last week of keeping the Broncos offense in check, albeit without Cortland Sutton. The Jaguars defense that I thought was going to be atrocious this year, forced 2 interceptions and only allowed 1 score, a touchdown reception for Nyheim Hines. I think that was the biggest miss I had last week, was having the Colts -7. The Colts really let me down, but I'm not convinced that this Jaguars defense is that good. The Jaguars were tied for the 5th most touchdowns allowed to tight ends last year, and as we saw in week 1, the Titans love to use their tight ends. We saw it all of last year as well in the red zone. So I think Jonnu Smith is a good option this week. DJ Shark, Keelan Cole, and rookie Laviska Shenault all had touchdown catches for the Jaguars last week, but none of them had over 50 yards receiving. I think you can start DJ Shark, and I'd give the edge to Chenault over Keelan Cole just because Chenault also had 2 carries. It seems like they will be using him all over the field. Like a lot of the draft analysts said that the Jaguars should use this kid. They're going to give him the ball out of the backfield. They're going to use him in the slot out wide. They're going to put him in motion. It's going to be cool. Next, we got the Vikings at the Colts. The Colts lost Marlon Mack last week, so it's now all on the rookie Jonathan Taylor and Naheem Hines, who had 8 catches and 2 touchdowns last week. He also had 7 of the team's 20 running back carries, which I think is even more significant. The Vikings allowed the Packers running backs to catch 9 of their 11 targets in week 1, and we know how much Phillip Rivers loves to target his running backs, so I got Hines locked into a flex spot in multiple leagues this week. And going forward, I think in PPR leagues, he's easily now a must-start, at least as a flex, if not an RB2. It was encouraging to see T.Y. Hilton get 9 targets, but I think the biggest surprise for the Colts offense was Paris Campbell also got 9 targets. He's one of those third-year wide receivers that could have a big year this year. So another guy that, after week 1, if he's available on the waiver wire, is maybe not a bad guy to take against this Vikings secondary that I outlined last week. Has a lot of young guys playing. The most experienced defensive back, or the most experienced corner for the Vikings is Mike Hughes, who played 5 games last year, I think it was. So maybe Phillip Rivers gets back on track and kind of picks apart these young corners. Next, we got the Rams and the Eagles. Very interesting game here. Battle of the top 2 picks in 2016. The line on this game has moved crazily. I think it started as the Eagles minus 3.5, and then all of a sudden, a day later, it's the Rams minus 1.5. So a lot of people are very intrigued by this game. It is one of my picks against the spread, so I won't go too deep here. I think you start the 2 Ram wide receivers. I think you start Tyler Higbee too. The Eagles gave up a touchdown to Logan Thomas last week, so Higbee should be able to make some plays. I think the Rams running backs are in play as well. The Eagles gave up 2 rushing touchdowns to Peyton Barber. So Malcolm Brown, who also scored 2 touchdowns last week, should be pretty good. In week 1, he had 18 carries and 4 targets. Who the hell saw this coming from Malcolm Brown? Cam Akers had 15 touches as well, so I think you can still get away with flexing this dude. If it turns out to be a high-scoring game, maybe Akers sees a little bit more of the work than Malcolm Brown does. Next, we got the Giants and the Bears. This game is one of my over-unders for week 2, so stay tuned for that if you want to break down on this New York Football Giants at the Bears. Next, we got the 49ers and the I'm going to start calling them the New Jersey Jets. How about that? Another set of teams already dealing with some big injuries. Le'Veon Bell is on IR for at least 3 weeks. The 49ers allowed 180 yards rushing to the Cardinals last week. Half of them were Kyler Murray's, but still, we didn't see that a lot from the 49ers last year, teams running the ball at will on them. So I think the immortal Frank Gore is in play here in non-PPR leagues, which is just insane to say. But if you play in leagues where you're not getting points on receptions, those running backs that are guaranteed touches just become so much more valuable. Don't forget where Gore spent the first 10 years of his career, either in San Francisco, which means revenge. Yes, our first revenge game of the year. Like I said earlier, I nailed Jamison Crowder last week. I said he would see a big target share versus the Bills, and he did. He caught 7 of his 13 targets for 115 yards and a touchdown. I did guarantee that he would have 8 catches, so I'm sorry if I missed that prop over 7.5, but still 7 catches, 13 targets, and a touchdown on over 100 yards of receiving. I like him again this week. He is questionable right now with a hamstring injury, but the Jets wide receivers are just so banged up that I think if Crowder plays, he's a must-start. And the 49ers are without Richard Sherman in this game. He's on IR as well, so that's a pretty significant blow to the 49ers, who, if there was one weakness on this team, it was their cornerbacks. The 49ers offense is also hurting pretty bad. Deebo Samuels was not able to play last week, and he looks like he's no closer to being able to play this week. George Kittle has a sprained knee, and it's not clear if he's going to be able to play. Plus, the Jets' run defense is actually, or it was, one of the biggest strengths of the team last year, so I don't think the 49ers are going to just come out and dominate in the run game. Plus, they're coming from the West Coast to the East Coast to play a 1 o'clock game. It's a tough spot for the 49ers with how many injuries they're dealing with. I was torn on picking this game as my under, but as a miserable Jets fan, I stayed away because I always get screwed every time I bet against the Jets or on the Jets, really. If I take them in a suicide pool, they lose. If I take the other team in a suicide pool, they win. So I learned last year, just don't even involve the Jets in any of my plays at all. The Washington football team at the Arizona Cardinals. This game is interesting as well. I just mentioned how Kyler Murray had 91 rushing yards last week. I don't see that happening in this one. Washington's first-round defensive end combo they looked pretty damn good last week. Carson Wentz was sacked 8 times. If you want to stop a quarterback from rushing, you got to set the edges. And this tandem of Montez Sweat and Chase Young, I think, is going to give teams a lot of problems for years to come. Plus, they got a defensive tackle, Deron Payne, another first-round pick. He is also a big problem up the middle, which I don't care what kind of quarterback you are, you don't like pressure up in your face. So I think we all know that DeAndre Hopkins would lead the Cardinals in targets this year, but holy Schlemiel, 16 of the 37 targets went his way. Obviously, you play Hopkins every week, but this makes me concerned about Christian Kirk, who I drafted in 5 leagues. Kirk led the team in targets in both of the games versus the 49ers last year, so hopefully we see him get a bit more involved this week. Next, we got the Ravens at the Texans. I have one side of this game on my 3-legger against the spread, so stay tuned for a breakdown on this game. Next, we got the Chiefs at the Chargers, a good old-fashioned AFC West showdown. The Chiefs have played Mahomes pretty well last year, held him to just 356 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in 2 games, so under 200 yards passing in both of those games. The Chargers also kept Tyreek Hill from catching either of his 2 targets in the first game. Tyreek Hill was able to kind of rebound in a second game, 4 of 5 targets for 61 yards. I'm not saying sit any Chiefs. I would never say to sit any Chiefs. Even if the 85 Bears rolled up, I wouldn't suggest you sit any Chiefs. But I would temper my expectations for Mahomes, Hill, and the rest of the wide receivers for the Chiefs. Travis Kelce's pretty much matchup proof, so you don't ever have to worry about starting him. But for the Chargers, I would still roll with Hunter Henry in Week 2. He led the Chargers in receiving last week with 71 yards. He saw a nice, healthy 8 targets, and the only touchdown that the Chiefs gave up in the passing game last week was to the Texans tight end Jordan Akins. So maybe we see Hunter Henry get in the end zone this week. All right, Patriots at the Seahawks. I can't wait for this game. Seahawks put up 38 points last week. Russell Wilson completed 31 of his 35 pass attempts. The running backs only got 13 carries for the Seahawks. That's total. Russ said this offseason that they were going to that he wanted to throw the ball more, and they did exactly that. He completed passes to 9 different players. The Patriots might have lost a lot of their guys this past offseason, but one thing you can always count on with Bill Belichick is that he's going to take away your biggest threat in the passing game. The question is, though, who is that biggest threat, at least in Belichick's mind? Is it Tyler Lockett, who caught all 8 of his targets for 92 yards, or is it DK Metcalf, who only caught half of his 8 targets, but he had that big 38-yard touchdown reception? I'm not going to sit any of my Seahawks players besides maybe Carlos Hyde, but I would stay away from them in DFS this week. I just can't wait to see Cam versus Russell Wilson. It's going to be fun. And our Monday Night Football game here, we got the Saints at the Raiders. At first glance, I was tempted to use this game for my overplay. of the week. But I changed my mind when I found out Michael Thomas would probably miss this game. He's just such a massive part of that offense. I don't think they will be as potent as they usually are. The Raiders did just give up 30 points to the Panthers, so I think this is a big Kamara game. I'm guessing we see Taysom Hill run a lot more routes and get a lot more involved than he usually does. I would definitely take a chance with Emmanuel Sanders in DFS this week. I can see him scoring this week easily. Last week, Jared Cook had a pretty big game, 80 yards receiving on 5 catches plus. This week, he's got the added element of
revenge.
Yes, he played for the Raiders last, and also, the running back. I can't think of his name now. The backup running back for the Saints. Whatever. He had a big game. It's also a revenge game for him because he played for the Raiders. But for the Raiders, I'm not telling you to sit Josh Jacobs, but do not expect another 3-touchdown game. The Saints' run defense looked nasty last week against the Buccaneers. I think the best options for the Raiders here are going to be their slot receivers. So that's either Darren Waller or Hunter Renfrow. I don't see either of the rookie wide receivers making a big impact in this game. So that's going to do it for the Week 2 breakdowns. I'm going to take a short break, and then I'm going to jump into the Week 2 podcast picks. All right, we're back. Last week was a pretty good week, like I said, 6-3 on my Week 1 picks. Pretty good week, if I can toot my horn a little bit. Thank you. Lots of research went into Week 1. But I hit on both of my over and under for the week, with Houston and Kansas City staying under 54.5 and the Tampa Bay and New Orleans game going over 47.5. I hit on my road dog of the week with the Packers putting a whooping on the Vikings in Minnesota. I hit on 2 of the 3 guys on my TD score parlay. Kelsey scored the first touchdown of the 2020 season. Josh Jacobs not only scored, but he scored 3 times. But Tariq Cohen only saw 2 targets and 6 carries. David Montgomery did end up being able to play, got 14 touches, so I missed on that. I think if Montgomery did not play, Cohen would have had a much better game, obviously. I hit on the Raiders minus 3 points, but I missed on the Colts minus 7.5. They got beat up pretty good by Jacksonville, and I missed on the Jets getting 6.5 points. Like I mentioned earlier, I just can't win when I pick either for or against the Jets. So I'm probably going to be staying away from the Jets going forward. So let's get into my Week 2 picks here. We got the Packers minus 6.5 versus the Lions. It opened at 5.5. The Packers scored 5 touchdowns last week, and they held the Vikings to only 10 points going into the fourth quarter. So I like them to win by a touchdown in Week 2, especially if Kenny Golladay does not play in this game. He's still listed as questionable as of right now. My next one is the Rams, minus 1.5 at the Eagles. Like I said, this line's been jumping around like crazy, but I like the Rams to win, and I think they can win by 2 points at least. The Rams were physical in Week 1. They got back to that running game that we saw with Todd Gurley for those 2 years where they were winning, whatever it was, 11, 12 games. 40 attempts for 153 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns last week for the LA Rams. The Eagles just gave up 2 rushing touchdowns to Peyton Barber, and they're going to be down a few big defensive linemen. Vinny Curry will probably be placed on IR, and Brandon Graham is in concussion protocol, so I kind of like the Rams favored on the road here. Next, we got the Ravens minus 7 at the Texans. The Ravens are just one of the most fun teams to watch. I love the Ravens. They put up 38 points on the Brownies last week, and that's with Patrick Ricard fumbling in the red zone. The Ravens only scored 3 points on the Browns' unsuccessful fake punt in their own territory in the first quarter. Just such an amazingly dumb call that was. So it could have easily been a 50 burger for the Ravens. They showed no rust. Lamar Jackson went 20 of 25. They only rushed for 107 yards, but They still looked great. The Texans, however, did not. They scored on their opening drive and then did not score again until garbage time halfway through the fourth quarter when they were down by 27 points. So Will Fuller racked up some yardage, but just wasn't able to hit on any of those deep bombs. So I think the Ravens are going to keep rolling. I like them to win by a touchdown again in week 2. I think the biggest thing for the Ravens last week was with only 41 seconds on the clock in the second quarter going into half, the Ravens went on a 7-play, 70-yard drive, all passing. It was capped off with a Mark Andrews touchdown, his second touchdown of the game. They are borderline unstoppable in the red zone with Andrews and Jackson and those running backs. Just love watching the Ravens play. My over for week 2, the New York Football Giants at the Bears. I think it was 42.5. I don't know why I don't have these spreads on here, but give me just one moment to get out of airplane mode and bring up the good old FanDuel Sportsbook app and check out what that line is as of right now. On Thursday at 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time, it is currently NFL tags here. Let's find the New York Football Giants. It is 42 right now, so 21 points each. I think that could happen. I was going to use this game for the road dog of the week, but I actually like another game better. The Giants were only able to put up 16 points last week, but Daniel Jones did throw an interception in the red zone, so you got to figure they would have gotten to at least 19 there. The Steelers' defense looks like they're going to be dominant this year, so I'm not going to overreact to Saquon's 15 carries for 6 yards. The Giants gave up 3 touchdown passing and allowed Benny Snell to rush for 113 yards. The Bears gave up 6.5 yards per carry to Adrian Peterson, so I think both teams will be able to move the ball here. We just saw Darius Slayton and Daniel Jones connected on 2 deep balls, one for a touchdown. Trubisky got bailed out with an amazing catch from Allen Robinson. Anthony Miller, one of these third-year wide receiver breakout candidate guys. So I think we'll see some points scored in Chicago there. My under of the week is this Thursday night football game, the Bengals at the Browns. It did open at 42.5. Let's see what it is right now. It's now at 44.5, so even better for our under. The Browns were just held to only 6 points in week 1. The Bengals' rookie quarterback scored the team's only touchdown running the ball into the end zone. I know this year is different, but and Burrow was their number 1 pick, but I'll take the rookie going on the road for the first time in the division versus an offense with a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, new system altogether. I like the Battle of Ohio to stay under 43. Usually we see pretty low-scoring games in these Thursday night football games, and generally the running backs do pretty well. So if you're going to take advantage of this FanDuel three-team parlay or 3-leg parlay that they're giving away, it's like you have to put down 20, but you get 10 back no matter what, even if you lose. So it's essentially you pay $20 or you pay $10, but you get a $20 value parlay. So if you do end up going with that, I would suggest you pick at least one of the running backs to score, because generally we see running backs score on Thursday nights, especially the home running backs. So take that for what it is. My 3-legger TD scorer parlay here. I got Zeke Elliott. The Falcons allowed 3 touchdowns to Seahawks running backs last week, 1 rushing and 2 receiving. Zeke scored 1 of each last week, so I like him to score again against this Falcons team, again, in a game that I think is going to be high scoring. Mark Andrews is the second guy on my 3-legger to score. Scored twice last week. He is the focal point of their passing game, and he is a dominant force in the red zone. The Texans allowed a touchdown in the first quarter to Kelsey last week after he scored 3 touchdowns in 1 quarter in their playoff game last year. You think you want to cover that guy. The Texans were in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to tight ends last year, and it looks like they haven't gotten any better at defending the tight ends. So not that you need any extra confidence in taking Mark Andrews to score a touchdown, but I think he sees the end zone again versus the Texans. And my last guy is Ronald Jones. The Panthers were the worst run defense last year by far, and in week 1 they gave up 3 touchdowns to Josh Jacobs, 2 on the ground. Jacobs had 140 yards total yards. Ronald Jones got 19 touches to Leonard Fournette's 6 touches. So I think we might have overreacted a little bit to the Fournette signing. If Jones continues to run the ball well and is able to stay on the field for third down, he should be just fine. I think the Bucs are going to try to take some pressure off that passing game with their wide receivers being kind of beat up. I think they're going to let that offensive line try and push around the very young Panthers defensive line. So I like Ronald Jones in week 2. And then my bonus Hail Mary tight end scorer prop worth throwing $5 at is Dan Arnold versus the Washington football team. Washington gave up the 7th most receptions and were tied for the 3rd most touchdowns allowed to tight ends last year. And in week 1, they got hammered by Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. I think the Cardinals take advantage of that apparent weakness in Washington with their great slot receivers. But Arnold has as good a shot as any to be that random-ass tight end that scores in week 2. So I think Dan Arnold's worth throwing $5 on because I think it pays like $200 or whatever right now. So why not take a shot and have some skin in the game of the Cardinals at the Washington football team? And then last but not least, let's get into our road dog of the week.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody.
My road dog for week 2, I got the Falcons getting 4.5 points at Dallas. I think this game is going to be a shootout. The Falcons and the Seahawks were in the 3rd highest scoring game of week 1. We all know the Cowboys have an explosive offense to themselves with all those wide receivers. I think this game turns into another shootout, and I think the Falcons can keep it close down to the end and maybe even pull out a last-minute win. So give me the 4.5 points with the Falcons to win as my road dog for week 2. And that's going to do it for the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football podcast for week 2. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you check us out in week 3. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.
You know that feeling you get when you sense a team's winning streak is about to end? Or when you know the pundits are getting it all wrong? That feeling? That's me. I'm your hunch. I was there back in Istanbul when you just knew the comeback was on. I'm the guy that tells you when the odds don't look so odd. I'm your hunch. It's time to start listening.
Heed your hunch with Betway. Download the app to find out more about Betway's Bet Club. Full terms apply. 18 plus on Louis.net. Bet the responsible way.
You know that feeling you get when you sense a team's winning streak is about to end? Or when you know the pundits are getting it all wrong? That feeling? That's me. I'm your hunch. I was there back in Istanbul when you just knew the comeback was on. I'm the guy that tells you when the odds don't look so odd. I'm your hunch. It's time to start listening.
Heed your hunch with Betway. Download the app to find out more about Betway's Bet Club. Full terms apply. 18 plus on Louis.net. Bet the responsible way.